watching Channel 16, your Fairfax County government channel.
Hello, I'm Mason District Supervisor Penny Gross. Welcome to Mason Matters, the television show to bring you news and information about our Mason District community. You may be familiar with reports about invasive species that have made their way into the U.S. and the ecological challenges they posed. If unchecked, invasive species can harm native species, even leading to extinction. We usually hear about invasive animals that have made their way into our regions, but plants also can be introduced and cause substantial havoc. One example of a common invasive plant in Fairfax County is bamboo. Bamboo is versatile and can be used for many purposes. One popular choice is to use bamboo as a landscaping feature, such as a privacy hedge. However, bamboo can take over yards quickly, causing destruction to the natural environment, plant species, and adjacent properties. Bamboo and other invasive plants may be introduced by homeowners with good intentions, but they can have negative environmental impacts, especially if they are not maintained. Joining me this evening to talk about bamboo and other invasive plants and Fairfax County's efforts to protect both public and private properties from invasive plant species are Jack Weyant, Director of Fairfax County's Department of Code Compliance, and Erin Stockschlaeder, Invasive Management Area Program Coordinator for Fairfax County's Park Authority. Jack Weyant is a professional engineer with 11 years of county experience, including the Director of Site Development and Inspections Division. He's been the Director of the Department of Code Compliance for the past 3 years. Before coming to the county, Jack was a consulting civil engineer in the private sector for more than 25 years. Erin Stockschlaeder is an ecologist with the Fairfax County Park Authority. She manages the Invasive Management Area Program, which focuses on habitat restoration through volunteer engagement and community outreach. Erin began working for the Park Authority in 2010, immediately after receiving her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Biology from the State University of New York, Brockport. In 2015, Erin received her Master of Science from George Mason University in Environmental Science and Policy. She is a certified ecologist through the Ecological Society of America. Welcome to Mason Matters.
Thank you.
This is a very good topic for a summertime show. So let's start our conversation, Erin, with you. The basics. What's an invasive species? Why is it a risk to native species, and how are they usually introduced?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me here, Penny, to talk about invasive plants. So invasive plants are species that have not evolved here in Fairfax. They have come to Fairfax from other parts of the world or even other parts of the country. So using bamboo as an example, bamboo came here from Asia. It was imported for privacy screening and other landscape benefits. Invasive plants typically have characteristics that allow them to outcompete our native plant species, such as producing a lot of seed, having a longer growing season, and also growing very rapidly. When this happens, they are able to form what we call a monoculture. And a great example of this is bamboo. If you've ever seen a bamboo hedge, you know that that's the only thing growing there is bamboo. It's very dense, it's very thick. Nothing else can come up in that environment. And that's what we call a monoculture. And when this happens, it excludes all the other plants from the area, leading to a decrease in biodiversity, not only for plants, but also for the wildlife that depends on those native species.
So that if an animal or a critter, if a critter is used to flitting about other species and only can find bamboo, they may not be able to eat it, they may not be able to nest in it. It doesn't provide any livelihood for them.
That's exactly correct. It would become effectively an ecologically dead zone, we would call it.
We hear a lot about kudzu in the southern United States especially. That's sort of a classic one that came in from somewhere else. and has just taken over places in the deep south. So bamboo has that same effect.
It does, and we can see that in public property and also on private property. It can start off as a small patch, and left unchecked, it can quickly take over a large area.
So English ivy may be an invasive also.
Exactly.
It's green, it's wonderful, it grows in the shade, it's terrific as a landscape piece,
Yep.
but when it starts growing up the trees and when it shuts out everything else, then it's also invasive.
Exactly. So it can grow up the trees, grow over the entire crown of the tree, cutting off the leaves from the sunlight, resulting eventually in that tree's death.
So it's a matter of it closes off the sunlight rather than it strangles the tree.
It's sometimes a combination of both. English ivy not only can cut off the leaves from sunlight, preventing photosynthesis, but the vines also hold moisture close to the bark, which results in the tree being able to rot easier and therefore making it more susceptible to things like wind damage.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. I hadn't thought about that. Jack, we started off talking about bamboo, and it is popular among some residents, but it's become a growing nuisance. Why do homeowners choose to plant bamboo? And tell us a little bit more about the problems that this plant poses.
Okay, yeah, like you had mentioned, bamboo is a very fast-growing, hardy grass. It can
It's a grass. It's considered a grass.
Considered a grass.
Even though it may be many feet in the air,
Right.
it's considered a grass.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And it can create a thick, dense hedge just in a matter of a few growing seasons. So for the property owner who wants to create a privacy screen against his property line or against his neighbor or even against his house, he can plant this in a relatively small area, but it soon might take over. People like it because it's an evergreen. It's green all year round. It's deer resistant. It's resistant to the cold in this area. A lot of good things about it, but left unchecked, you know, it can grow across the property line and it can grow into the right of way. The two, I think it's important to note, we deal with two types of bamboo, both of which are invasive, clumping bamboo and running bamboo. The clumping bamboo tends to grow in clumps and the roots spread slowly through the clumps. It's less invasive, but it's still an invasive plant. The running bamboo is what Fairfax County is concerned about. It tends to grow down and then long horizontal stems go out and back up. They're called rhizomes, and they create issues for us. So.
And that's what we see sometimes in neighbors' yards or just driving
Yes.
by. You say, golly, you can't see through there, and it will be bamboo.
Right.
It occurs to me also that a number of years ago we had a situation where bamboo was planted close to a stream, and it actually was creating a problem where the water could not flow through. It was so thick, it was so dense, the water could not get through. So when you had a flood, it was diverting water into places that it shouldn't have been, and it was just because it was bamboo. It's if it's thick enough that the water can't get through, that's you can have some idea of how damaging it might be. But a homeowner can choose to plant bamboo in their yard. What are some of the general considerations and guidelines that they should follow to properly maintain it? I've heard about planting it in an old bathtub, you know, digging down, putting it in a bath, because it can't grow through the cast iron.
Right.
But tell us about the general considerations and guidelines that a resident should do.
So if, like we mentioned, if a homeowner desires to create a screen, clumping bamboo may be a good choice for them. It'll grow rapidly, create that screen, but we also need to be thinking about our neighbors. That's where the big problem comes in. Being a good neighbor. A good rule is to plant the bamboo and try to maintain a 10-foot strip between your property line and the bamboo, or between the street and the bamboo. We also have methods to contain it underground. You can install a metal or a plastic barrier underground, and the roots will spread, hit the barrier. It won't stop it from spreading. It'll deflect it, and it'll just grow down and around, take a little longer for it to spread.
So it's more difficult, it takes more work
Yes.
to plant it that way than just digging a hole in the ground. You have to do some preparation, almost like you do a rain garden with a preparation underneath.
Absolutely, and I'd like to add that the barrier does have to be fairly deep, so it has to be 24 to 36 inches deep around the entirety of the bamboo. Some people will do it just on the edge facing a natural area or the landscaping, where I have gone out to some properties and seen bamboo actually coming up through paved driveways, coming through foundations. So it is really important to do that barrier method around the entire population of bamboo.
Wow, so then you've got a problem. Somebody's established a problem, thought they were doing good things, but now you've got a problem, and it's not only a landscaping problem, but it's an issue between neighbors. So, Jack, what steps need to be taken to contain or remove it? And Erin, if you wanted to add anything, but what do you need to do to be able to contain it? We've talked about containing it. What about removing it? It is really hard to get rid of.
Right, and you said, I think the key words are maintain, contain, or remove. So containing it with these barriers, as Erin mentioned, underground or a good method, metal or plastic. Maintaining it, try to keep it from spreading. If you see it popping up in that 10-foot strip we mentioned, try to keep that strip grass-free. Removal can get very expensive because we've all seen the clumps of bamboo in your neighborhood, and if you think about removing that, you got to cut it down, then you have to bring in equipment, sometimes heavy equipment, to dig down the roots, take them out, bring in new dirt, sod, and then even after you do that, they're pretty tricky little roots. They can pop up, and you have to continue to maintain it.
It can take 4 or 5 years or more to get rid, to truly get rid.
Yeah.
Sounds like a mimosa tree.
Yes, yeah,
coming
they
out
keep on
years
coming
later.
back. And like you said, we have to involve, when you do it on park property at least, we do involve heavy equipment. We have a tool called a forestry mulcher that we bring out that essentially chops it all down and makes it into a fine mulch. And then the second year we go out there and treat it with a herbicide that works on grasses. So you're not, because oftentimes these things, the bamboo can be 20 feet tall. So you don't want to spray something that's above your head. So we have to get it on, wait to spray it when it's regrowing. But you have to do that again for 4 to 5 years minimum.
So this gets to be where you think about, I want to create a privacy hedge. What am I going to use? Not bamboo.
Right.
I imagine that bamboo is fairly inexpensive, and it's not illegal to sell it. It's just a real difficult situation for homeowners and for the parkland. When you see bamboo, is it usually planted on the edge of somebody's property that's adjacent to parkland?
In most cases, when I receive a call, and bamboo is the #1 species I receive calls about, it is planted at the property boundary. And oftentimes I get these calls from new homeowners. So they've purchased the home, they recognize that it's an issue, but there's not really a whole lot that the Park Authority can do about it because it is so expensive and so difficult to remove it, and we have such limited resources. But most of the time, the people that are moving into this new home, they recognize that it is an issue. It's something that they inherited when they bought the home. And it was originally planted as that privacy screening, but in those intervening years, it's spread out from its original purpose.
You want to see things grow. We live in a fairly lush area, a wet area, and things do grow pretty well. But this just becomes overwhelming. So, Jack, what assistance can the Department of Code Compliance provide if plant species create issues? I mean, it's not exactly a code violation, is it?
No, it's not. It's, you know, we have the grass ordinance, and I mentioned bamboo is a grass, but it doesn't fall under that ordinance.
It doesn't fall under the ordinance.
We go out and notice grass over 12 inches. We can have the person mow it, but the bamboo just doesn't fall under that.
It doesn't fall under that. So you're trying to educate, I'm sure.
So it's not a violation. We just want people to be aware. Think about your neighbor. Think about the impact on his property, about surrounding vegetation, as Erin mentioned. And we've created a bamboo information sheet that's a really nice piece of literature. Talks about planting, maintaining, containing, removing bamboo. We've got that on our website. I think there's a link on the Park Authority site. And I've actually given copies to all the board offices for their use in distribution to citizens. And I think a lot of the board members are going to be, I think even you are going to include in your upcoming newsletter. So,
Well, I want to follow that up because the Virginia General Assembly enacted legislation to allow localities to control and remove running bamboo. But Fairfax County decided to provide outreach and education rather than adopting an ordinance that makes it a crime.
Right.
So as I recall, we had quite a healthy discussion at the Board of
Yes.
Supervisors about this. And so your recommendation was outreach and education.
Right.
You have enough on your plate, probably, not going after running bamboo?
Yeah, we don't want to chase that too much, no.
Erin, I want to switch to some of the invasive plants that are on local parkland and the wildlife that might be at risk. So tell us about some of the invasive plants that threaten our parklands and how the invasive management area program helps restore parklands. And I have a couple of places in Mason District that I'd like to talk about.
Sure,
especially.
absolutely. So there are a number of invasive plants in Fairfax County. You've already mentioned a couple: kudzu, English ivy, burning bush is another one that's very
Yes.
popular as a landscaping plant. And these plants are planted on purpose in people's lawns, but then the birds take those seeds and drop them off in parkland where they are able to grow without any natural predators. I know in Mason District we have several parks that are currently battling porcelainberry, which is another invasive plant. It looks very similar to grape before it has the berries, but the berries themselves are actually quite pretty. They're like this mottled purple and blue. And so we're working on removing porcelainberry at Mason District Park and also at Justice Park. So we have invasive management IMA sites there where volunteers are working on removing porcelainberry. We've also done a couple of native plantings at that site. But just like the bamboo, it takes several years of pulling in order to see a decrease in the populations that are there. They have very strong root systems. They've been putting seeds down for years. So right now we're working on exhausting the seed bank at those locations.
Because when you see this porcelainberry, I'm thinking especially both at Mason District Park at the upper parking lot near the amphitheater, as well as at Justice Park. It's growing all the way up into all the way up into the crowns of the trees. So when you're pulling it, you're trying to pull the roots out.
Absolutely.
But then try to pull it down, and it must weigh a lot.
Yeah, so what we normally recommend is cutting it at about our level and again pulling up the roots, but we normally don't pull it out of the trees because we don't want to pull it down on volunteers. That can be a hazard to volunteers. But once it's disconnected from the roots, all the leaves will die, the trees will be able to get their sunlight again, and the vines will come down on their own normally during windstorms and things like that.
So hopefully what we see will eventually come down.
Yeah, exactly.
Not unlike what I think it was the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust a few years ago at Annandale Community Park had a work day. I remember I went out with my clippers and so forth, and we girdled essentially the trees. Removed about this much, maybe a foot of ivy, sort of and then took the roots out and left the rest of
exactly same concept.
So it's the same concept, and ultimately it will the ivy will die, and you can do that on your own property.
Yes,
it's probably the simplest way to get rid of ivy.
Definitely.
Is just spend a nice morning girdling that tree.
Yep, get your
with
workout,
clippers,
get some fresh air, save a tree.
and throw it into a plastic bag and get rid of it. Don't mulch it, I guess.
Correct.
Is because that'll just spread it some more.
Yep.
It'll take away all the work that you've done. So tell us about some of the initiatives to plant native plants in Northern Virginia and how we can help native plants thrive.